Audie Murphy. Date: June 15th, 1945. Location: Farmersville, Texas. Inside the house, the loudest sound in the world wasn't an artillery shell. It wasn't a tank engine. Right now, the loudest sound in the world was a fork hitting a china plate. Clink. Audie Murphy sat at the head of the dinner table. He was 20 years old. He was the most decorated soldier in American history. He had killed 240 enemy soldiers, earned the Medal of Honor, and survived the impossible. But sitting here, in his sister's dining room in Texas, he was sweating. The room was silent. His family sat around him, his sister, Corinne. His relatives, they were smiling. They were passing the mashed potatoes. They were safe. But Audie wasn't there. His eyes were locked on the window behind Corinne's head. The curtains fluttered slightly in the summer breeze. To his family, it was a gentle wind. To Audie's brain wired tight by 3 years of constant combat, movement meant danger. Movement meant a German sniper. "Audie," Corinne asked gently, "are you okay? You haven't touched your food." Audie blinked. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. Just a slight tremor, but enough to make the water in his glass ripple. He hid them under the table. "I'm fine," he lied. His voice sounded rusty, foreign. He looked up, and that's when it happened. The moment everything froze. His family was staring at him. They were looking at him with love, but also with confusion. They were waiting for the old Audie to crack a joke. They were waiting for the boy who used to hunt rabbits in these fields to come back. They didn't understand that the boy was gone. In his place sat a stranger who felt naked without his M1 carbine. Suddenly, a car backfired outside on the street. Bang! Audie didn't think. He didn't decide. His body reacted before his mind could stop it. In a split second, the Medal of Honor hero was nearly under the table, his heart hammering against his ribs like a machine gun. His fork clattered to the floor. Silence rushed back into the room. Absolute, suffocating silence. Slowly, Audie straightened up. He saw the looks on their faces now. Not whose love fear. They were afraid of him. They were afraid of what he had become. He forced a smile, but his eyes remained dead serious. He realized then that the Germans hadn't killed him, but they had taken his life anyway. Audie traveled 5,000 miles back to Texas, but part of him was still stuck in a muddy hole in France, waiting for the next attack. The family dinner continued, but the air was heavy. Audie looked at the front door. He realized the terrifying truth. Surviving the war was the easy part. Living with the memories. That was a battle he didn't know how to win. And night was coming, and with the night, the dreams would come. Audie Murphy. Location: Farmersville, Texas. Bedroom time: 11:30 p.m. The house went dark. One by one, the lights were clicked off. The sounds of family life, the radio, the washing of dishes, the laughter faded away. Now, there was only the silence. For most people, silence is peaceful. For Audie Murphy, silence was a threat. In the war, silence meant the enemy was moving into position. Silence meant they were watching you. Audie stood in the hallway, listening to the breathing of his sleeping family. They were asleep, defenseless. A protective instinct flared up in his chest, hot and sharp. He walked to the front door for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. He checked the lock. Click. Locked. He checked the windows. Closed. He moved like a ghost in his own home, checking perimeters just as he had done in the ruins of Holtz. But there were no Germans here. Just crickets and the smell of summer dust. He finally entered the small bedroom prepared for him. The bed looked comfortable. The sheets were clean and white. It looked like heaven. It looked like a trap. Audie sat on the edge of the mattress. It was too soft. After years of sleeping in muddy foxholes, on cold rocks, or in the back of vibrating trucks, a soft mattress felt wrong. It felt like he was sinking, like he couldn't move fast if he had to. He took off his boots. Then, he did something that would become a dark legend in his biographer. He reached into his bag and pulled out a pistol. It was heavy, cold steel, a souvenir from the war. A normal 20-year-old boy in Texas puts a book under his pillow, Or maybe a photo of a sweetheart. Audie Murphy checked the safety on the loaded gun and slid it under the pillow. He laid his head down directly over the weapon. He could feel the hard lump through the feathers. It was the only thing that made him feel safe enough to close his eyes. Sleep. He needed it desperately. His body was exhausted. He closed his eyes. At first, there was nothing. Just the blackness. But then, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The smell of Texas dust vanished, replaced by the smell of wet earth, cordite, and damp wool. He wasn't in a bed anymore. In his mind, the walls of the room dissolved. He was back in the woods. The trees were shattered stumps. The fog was rolling in, thick and gray. Wait, he thought in the dream. I'm home. I'm safe. But the dream didn't care. In the shadows of his mind, shapes were moving. Faceless figures in gray coats emerging from the mist. He tried to call out to his sister, to tell her to run, but he had no voice. He was paralyzed. The tension in the dream stretched like a rubber band about to snap. He wasn't fighting. He was waiting. Waiting for the noise. Waiting for the attack. He woke up with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed. His hand was already under the pillow. His fingers were wrapped tight around the grip of the pistol. He was breathing hard, sweat soaking through his t-shirt. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The room was empty. The moonlight spilled across the floor. No soldiers. No fog. Just a quiet Texas night. He slowly released the grip on the gun, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He looked around the peaceful room, feeling a profound sense of shame. He was a danger, not to the enemy, but to everyone around him. He realized then that he could lock the doors to keep the world out, but he couldn't lock his mind to keep the war out. He lay back down, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. He wouldn't sleep again tonight. The morning sun over Farmersville brought no relief, only exposure. After the sleepless night, with the gun under his pillow, Audie Murphy couldn't stand the quiet walls of his sister's house. He needed to move. In the army, standing still was how you got killed. So, he dressed in his civilian clothes that felt too loose on his thin frame and walked into town. He wanted to feel normal. He wanted to remember what it was like to be just a young man looking for a future. But the town hadn't changed. Every step down the main street felt like a performance. People stopped in their tracks. Shopkeepers came out to shake his hand. Old men patted him on the back, and young boys stared at him with wide, worshipping eyes. They didn't see Audie. They seen a living legend. Tell us about the Germans. Audie. Someone shouted. How many did you get? Asked another. They wanted stories. They wanted the glory. They treated the war like a football game that Audie had won for them. They didn't understand that every medal on his chest represented a friend who didn't come back or a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He smiled politely, nodded, and kept walking. But inside, he felt a wall of glass separating him from everyone else. They were living in a world of crops, weather, and local gossip. He was living in a world of survival. He tried to think about a job. Before the war, he had picked cotton and hunted rabbits to feed his family. He was a survivor. But now, what does a man do after he has commanded troops in the chaos of battle? The local businesses offered him opportunities, but it was all charity. They wanted to hire the Medal of Honor winner, not the man. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had no skills for this world. He knew how to read a map, how to strip a machine gun in the dark, and how to keep men alive under fire. None of that mattered. Here, he was 20 years old, with a 5th-grade education and a skill set designed for destruction. He felt useless. The isolation grew worse when he tried to reconnect with old friends. They talked about girls, cars, and the price of feed. Audie tried to listen, but his mind drifted. He would look at a brick wall and wonder if it could stop a .50 caliber round. He would hear a plane overhead and instinctively calculate its trajectory. He couldn't bridge the gap. He sat in diners, staring at his coffee, feeling like an alien species. The town of Farmersville, which he had fought so hard to return to, now felt like a prison of boredom and misunderstanding. He was the most famous man in America, yet he had never felt more invisible. One afternoon, standing alone on a dusty corner, the realization hit him hard. The war had given him a terrible purpose, but at least it was a purpose. In peace, he was drifting. He was just a small man with too many memories, and nowhere to put them. He needed an escape. He needed to be someone else. Anyone else but the shattered soldier standing in the Texas heat. That was when the idea began to form. A way out, not just out of Texas, but out of himself. A famous actor named James Cagney had seen his picture on the cover of Life magazine and invited him to Hollywood. At the time, it seemed ridiculous. But now, looking at the empty road ahead, it looked like a lifeline. If he couldn't live his own life, maybe he could pretend to live someone else's on a screen. Hollywood was supposed to be the land of dreams, but for Audie Murphy, it quickly turned into a landscape of plastic and rejection. He arrived in Los Angeles in late 1945, carrying his Medal of Honor in a suitcase and a head full of ghosts. James Cagney, the famous tough guy actor, had invited him, believing the war hero had star potential, but the reality of Tinseltown was colder than the winter in France. Audie stepped off the train, expecting a new beginning. But he found himself in a city obsessed with surfaces, where nobody cared about what was inside a man. The irony was bitter, and two Mobius war heroes were 6 feet tall, with booming voices and chiseled jaws like John Wayne. Audie was 5'5", weighed 130 pounds, and had the soft, freckled face of a teenager. Casting directors took one look at the most lethal soldier in American history and laughed. They told him he didn't look tough enough to play a soldier. The rejection stung, but the poverty was worse. The initial excitement faded, and Cagney's mentorship could only do so much. Audie was too proud to ask for handouts. The hero of the nation found himself broke, living in the back of Terry Hunt's athletic club. He slept on a cot in a gymnasium, smelling the sweat of other men, surrounded by punching bags and weights. It was a humiliating fall from grace. He had commanded men in life-or-death battles, yet here he was, surviving on handouts and sleeping in a gym, ignored by the very country that had cheered for him weeks ago. The isolation he felt in Texas followed him to California, but now it was mixed with a sense of failure. He wasn't a soldier anymore, and he wasn't an actor yet. He was nothing. But the worst part wasn't the poverty. It was the fakeness of the violence. Audie watched actors pretending to die on sets, clutching their chests and delivering dramatic final speeches. It made him sick. He knew what death really looked like. It was ugly, sudden, and loud. It wasn't poetic. Watching Hollywood sanitize the war triggered something dark inside him. His temper, always short since the war, became explosive. He got into fistfights with people who disrespected him, his small-size baiting bullies who had no idea they were provoking a trained killer. He was a walking stick of dynamite, and the fuse was always burning. Even in the glamour of Los Angeles, the war didn't leave him alone. He still slept with the loaded pistol under his pillow at the gym. The sounds of the city occurred. A sudden shout would send him diving for cover, leaving onlookers staring at him like he was insane. He tried to date young actresses, hoping for a normal connection, but how could he explain the things he had seen? How could he explain that while they worried about auditions, he was worrying about the faces of dead friends that visited him every night? He was surrounded by beautiful people and bright lights, but Audie Murphy was living in a dark tunnel. He was realizing that you can travel thousands of miles to escape your past, but you always bring your head with you. Hollywood wasn't saving him. It was just another place to be alone. Success finally came, but it arrived with a cruel twist. After years of sleeping in gyms and fighting for scraps, Audie Murphy broke through. In 1949, he landed his first leading role in The Kid from Texas, playing Billy the Kid. The public loved it. They saw the baby-faced killer on screen and felt a thrill of authenticity they couldn't explain. Audie wasn't acting. He was channeling. When he stared down a camera lens with cold, detached intensity, he wasn't pretending to be a gunman. He was remembering what it felt like to hold a life in his hands. Hollywood suddenly embraced him. The money started rolling in. He bought a big house, drove fast cars, and married beautiful women. On the surface, The poor boy from Texas had won the American dream twice, once on the battlefield and once in the box office. But the walls of his mansion held a secret that the fan magazines never printed. While the world saw a glamorous movie star, the nights were still a torture chamber. The silence of a large, empty house was even louder than the silence of the foxhole. The demons hadn't left. They had just moved into a more expensive neighborhood. Sleep was impossible. Audie would lie awake until dawn, his body exhausted but his mind racing at 100 miles an hour, scanning the shadows for threats that weren't there. The loaded German Walther pistol was still under his pillow, a cold comfort that terrified his wives and lovers. He was a man besieged by his own memory, desperate for just 1 hour of peace. That was when the doctors introduced him to a new kind of weapon, the sleeping pill. At first, it seemed like a miracle. A simple prescription, Saconal or Placidil, and the noise in his head would finally stop. The pills offered a black, dreamless void where the Germans couldn't find him. For the first time in years, Audie slept. But the relief was a trap. The war had taught him that survival required constant vigilance, but the pills demanded surrender. Soon, 1 pill wasn't enough. Then 2. Then 3. The most decorated soldier in history, the man who had single-handedly stopped a tank attack, was slowly surrendering to a small plastic bottle on his nightstand. The addiction took hold with the same ruthless efficiency as an enemy ambush. By day, he was the charismatic hero, signing autographs and smiling for the press. By night, he was a trembling addict, needing the chemical knockout just to function. The pills dulled his reflexes and clouded his mood. His temper became even more volatile. He would snap at directors, get into dangerous gambling debts, and push away the people who tried to love him. He was fighting a new war now, one without medals or parades. It was a chemical warfare waged inside his own bloodstream. He realized with a terrified clarity that he had survived the machine guns of Colmar, only to be slowly killed by the medicine cabinet in Hollywood. The hero was drowning in plain sight, and nobody could hear him scream because the applause was too loud. In 1955, Hollywood approached Audie with a proposition that sounded borderline insane. They wanted to make a movie based on his best-selling autobiography, To Hell and Back. But they didn't just want his story. They wanted him. The studio executives looked at the 30-year-old veteran with his tired eyes and pill addiction and asked him to play his 19-year-old self. At first, Audie refused. The idea was repulsive. He had written the book to exorcise his demons, to get the war out of his head and onto paper. Now, they wanted him to put the uniform back on, pick up the rifle, and reenact the worst moments of his life for the price of a movie ticket. He told them he was too old, too broken, but the studio persisted, and eventually, driven by the need for financial security, Audie agreed. He signed the contract, unaware that he was signing up for a new kind of torture. Stepping onto the set of To Hell and Back was a surreal nightmare. The set designers had recreated the battlefields of France and Italy with terrifying accuracy. The mud, the tanks, the gray skyzette was all there. When Audie buttoned up his old army khakis, his hands shook. The uniform felt like a He wasn't an actor getting into character. He was a survivor, stepping back into the grave. The cast and crew treated him with reverence, but they couldn't understand what was happening inside him. When the pyrotechnics exploded and the blank rounds were fired, the noise triggered the raw, unprocessed trauma buried deep in his nervous system. Every take, one felt like a flashback. The director would yell action, and Audie wasn't acting anymore. He was back in the Colmar pocket, cold and afraid. The hardest part was the ghosts. The script required actors to play his dead friendsmen like Lady Tipton and Brandon, boys who had actually bled and died in Audie's arms. Watching these Hollywood actors walk around wearing the names of the dead was excruciating. In one scene, Audie had to reenact the moment his best friend was killed by a German soldier feigning surrender, the very event that had sent Audie into the blind rage which won him the Distinguished Service Cross. He had to watch his friend die all over again. He had to summon that same grief and fury for the cameras. When the scene was over, and the crew clapped for his great performance, Audie felt hollowed out. They were applauding his pain. The filming process pushed him to the brink. The lines between reality and cinema blurred until he couldn't tell the difference. He wasn't just remembering the war. He was reliving it. Day after day, take after take. When the movie was released, it became a massive blockbuster, the highest-grossing film Universal Studios would ever make until Jaws 20 years later. The world saw a heroic adventure and cheered. Audie Murphy looked at the screen and saw a documentary of his own destruction. The film cemented his status as an American legend, but the process of making it had stripped away the last layers of his emotional defense. He had gone to hell and back in reality, and then he had done it again for Hollywood. Now, he wondered if he would ever truly come back home. By the 1960s, the hero's life had become a chaotic blur of high stakes, gambling, and chemical dependency. Audie Murphy was searching for the adrenaline rush of combat in the casinos of Las Vegas and the racetracks of California. He bet tens of thousands of dollars on the turn of a card or the nose of a horse, desperate to feel that spike of heart-pounding intensity he had left behind in Europe. Winning or losing didn't matter as much as the feeling of risk. But while he could walk away from a poker table, he couldn't walk away from the pill bottle. The addiction to Placidel had become a chain around his neck, a master more demanding than any drill sergeant. The drug, prescribed to silence the screaming in his head, was now slowly killing his body. Audie, a man who valued freedom above all else, realized he was a prisoner, and Audie Murphy did not like being a prisoner. He made a decision that was as terrifying as charging a machine gun nest. He didn't check into a fancy rehab clinic. Those didn't really exist for stars back then, and his pride wouldn't allow it anyway. Instead, he rented a nondescript motel room. He walked in, placed a loaded pistol on the nightstand, a habit he could never break, and threw the pills away. He locked the door from the inside. He told his family not to disturb him. He was going to fight this enemy, the only way he knew how. Alone, for a week, that motel room became a battlefield. The withdrawal hit him with the force of a mortar shell. His body shook violently. His temperature spiked, and the hallucinations returned with a vengeance. He sweated through the sheets, thrashing in the dark, screaming at invisible enemies. It was a physical and mental purge. There were no medals to be won here, no cameras rolling, and no backup coming. It was just one man fighting his own nervous system. He lay in the dark, clutching the sheets, forcing himself to endure one more minute, then one more hour. It was the longest week of his life, longer than the entire Anzio campaign. But when he finally unlocked the door and stepped out into the sunlight, he was clean. He had defeated the addiction, but his greatest act of bravery was yet to come. In an era when men were expected to be stoic statues who never complained, Audie Murphy broke the silence. He did the unthinkable. He spoke to the press about his battle fatigue. He told the world about the nightmares, the sweating, and the addiction. He stood before Congress and pleaded for the government to do more for veterans returning from Korea and Vietnam. He risked his image as the tough, invincible cowboy to tell the truth. That war destroys men from the inside out. He became one of the first high-profile voices to shine a light on what we now call PTSD. He showed the world that admitting pain wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the ultimate proof of humanity. He had survived the withdrawal in the motel room, but his war for the minds of his fellow soldiers was just beginning. By May of 1971, Audie Murphy was 45 years old, but his eyes were ancient. The years of financial turmoil, gambling losses, and the relentless pressure of his own legend had taken their toll. He was broke, facing bankruptcy, and looking for one last deal to set things right. That deal led him to a small airfield in Atlanta, Georgia. He was scheduled to fly to Martinsville, Virginia, to inspect a modular home factory of potential business investment. It was a mundane, civilian trip. There were no generals, no orders, and no enemy lines. Just a businessman trying to survive. He boarded the blue and white Aero Commander 680, a small private plane, along with the pilot and 4 other passengers. It was Memorial Day weekend, a time when the nation paused to remember the men Audie had seen die. The irony was thick. While the country was preparing to wave flags and lay wreaths, the living symbol of their victory was sitting in a cramped plane, worrying about money. As they took off, The sky began to darken. The weather reports were bad. Rain, low visibility, and thick fog. It was the kind of weather that Audie had learned to hate in the mountains of Italy. Fog meant blindness. Fog meant you couldn't see what was coming. As the plane approached Roanoke, Virginia, the pilot contacted the tower. He was lost. The cloud cover had swallowed them whole. Visibility was zero. For Audie, sitting in the passenger seat, the sensation must have been terrifyingly familiar. The gray mist outside the window looked exactly like the smoke of the battlefield. The vibrating engine sounded like a tank. But this time he wasn't in control. He didn't have his rifle. He couldn't dig a foxhole. He was trapped in a metal tube, hurtling through the blindness at 200 miles per hour. At 11:08 a.m., on May 28, 1971, the radar signal vanished. The plane had slammed into the side of Brush Mountain, just beneath the summit. There was no fire, just the brutal impact of metal against rock and trees. The man who had dodged thousands of German bullets, who had walked through artillery barrages and minefields without a scratch, had died instantly in the quiet woods of Virginia. The bullet that had been chasing him since 1942 had finally caught up. But it wasn't made of lead, it was made of bad luck and a mountain in the fog. For 2 days, search parties combed the rugged terrain. When they finally found the wreckage on Memorial Day, the sight was eerie. Clothing and papers were scattered among the broken trees. The bodies were recovered in silence. The news shocked the world. It didn't seem possible. Audie Murphy was supposed to be invincible. He was the man who couldn't die. The public felt a strange, jarring disconnect. How could the greatest warrior of the 20th century die in a simple plane crash? It felt like a plot twist that didn't fit the story. But war doesn't care about narrative arcs, and neither does death. The hero was gone. His body was brought down from the mountain. But the question remained: how do you bury a man who belongs to the ages? The nation prepared to mourn. But Audie had left one final request, a specific instruction about his grave that would speak louder than any speech he ever gave. The nation was watching. The funeral was a solemn affair, attended by generals, politicians, and future presidents like George H.W. Bush. The United Nations flag flew at half-staff, a rare honor usually reserved for heads of state. But among the sea of black suits and dress uniforms, the most poignant presence was the veterans. Men who had served with him, men who had fought in different wars, and men who simply knew what it cost to carry the weight of a rifle. They came to say goodbye not to the movie star, but to the kid from Texas who had kept them alive. As the casket moved toward the gravesite, the air was filled with the mournful notes of taps. It is a sound that breaks the heart of any soldier, a final lullaby for the fallen. But as the ceremony concluded, a quiet controversy, a beautiful, heartbreaking detail began to emerge. It was about the headstone. B-Regulation Medal of Honor recipients are entitled to a special headstone. Their names are usually engraved in gold leaf, shining brightly against the white marble, standing out so that visitors can instantly recognize the hero from a distance. It is a mark of distinction, a way of saying, this man was different. This man was above the rest. It was the honor Audie Murphy had earned 24 times over. The cemetery officials were ready to install it. The public expected it. But Audie Murphy had left specific instructions. In his will, the man who had been called a one-man army made a final request that stunned the military bureaucracy. He explicitly forbade the gold leaf. He refused the special stone. He requested a standard, plain government issue headstone, the exact same stone given to a private who cooked meals or a mechanic who fixed jeeps. His reasoning was simple and devastatingly humble. Throughout his entire life, Audie had insisted that the real heroes were the men who didn't come back to friends, like Laddie Tipton, who died in the mud of France, while Audie survived. He believed that in death there is no rank. He didn't want to shine brighter than his brothers. He wanted to be lost among them. He wanted to be just another soldier in the formation, standing shoulder to shoulder with the boys of the 3rd Infantry Division forever. So they buried him in Section 46, near the amphitheater. They placed a plain white stone at his head. It lists his name, his rank, and his dates. It looks exactly like the thousands of other stones stretching out in perfect rows across the green hills of Virginia. There is no gold. There is no fanfare. Yet, despite his attempt to fade into the background, the visitors came, and they kept coming. A walkway had to be built specifically for his grave, because the grass was constantly worn away by the sheer number of boots and shoes stepping up to pay respects. He tried to hide in the crowd of the dead, but the world wouldn't let him go. Even in silence, his legacy screamed louder than gold ever could. If you walk into Arlington National Cemetery today and head to Section 46, you will see something remarkable. Among the endless rows of white marble, one specific area is different. The grass around Audie Murphy's grave is rarely green. It is often worn down to the brown earth. It is the second most visited gravesite in the entire cemetery, surpassed only by President John F. Kennedy. More than 50 years after his death, people are still making the pilgrimage. They leave coins, flowers, and small American flags. But why? They don't come just because he killed 240 enemy soldiers. They don't come just because he was a movie star. They come because Audie Murphy told us the truth. In a time when the world wanted to paint war as a glorious adventure, Audie showed us the cracks in the armor. He was the first to show America that you can win every medal in the box and still lose your soul. He showed us that the strongest soldier isn't the one who never feels fear, but the one who feels terror and moves forward anyway. He taught a generation that the war doesn't end when the peace treaty is signed. For the soldier, the war follows him home. It sits at his dinner table. It sleeps in his bed. The boy who froze when his family looked at him in 1945 never completely thawed out. He carried the weight of the Colmar pocket until the moment his plane hit the mountain. But in carrying that weight so publicly, he made it lighter for everyone else. Every veteran who today feels comfortable saying, "I'm not okay," or seeking help for PTSD, owes a debt to the small Texan who spoke up first. He turned his personal haunted house into a shelter for others. Audie Murphy lived 45 years, 11 months, and 8 days. It was a short life, but it was wide. He was a sharecropper, a soldier, a hero, a star, a poet, a gambler, and an advocate. He was a paradox. A gentle man who was a master of violence. A famous man who wanted to be anonymous. As you look at that simple, plain headstone, no gold leaf, no special carving, you realize he finally got what he wanted back in Chapter 1. He is not a stranger anymore. He isn't the alien at the dinner table. He is finally, truly, among his brothers. The gun is no longer under the pillow. The nightmares are finally gone. The soldier has reported for his final duty, and 'tis time the post is peaceful. Audie Murphy has finally come home.